Vikings have been a topic of great interest and excitement, especially in the modern world of entertainment. A bunch of angry blunt men ravaging through the lands of European kings is indeed a very interesting concept. After the introduction of several movies, shows and series, people's interest in this particular topic reached impressive levels. In just a few years, it shook the popularity of classic historical subjects like the Roman Empire and the World Wars. Today, we will explore their origins, culture, and history, but this will not be our only focus. We will go beyond these to understand the psychological drives which fueled their ambitions as they spread around the world. We will try to comprehend why they were so different. Our goal is to try and comprehend the foundations of their philosophy. Let's start from the beginning. There were several northern Germanic tribes living in the Scandinavian lands of modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They spoke a language which we call Old Norse today. It was a Germanic language. These Scandinavians actually had a lot in common with their Germanic Saxon cousins from the south. Their language, religion, and culture were similar. Most of what we know about their lives before they started their expansion are based on archaeological findings and runic inscriptions. They had their own version of a runic alphabet, but they did not write much aside from inscriptions on stones. Most of those stones were raised in the memory of a hero who passed away or told tales about important events such as expeditions and raids. They were pagans. They worshipped gods and goddesses like Odin, Loki, Thor, and Freya. They did not have a systematically established religion. We call the collection of their beliefs Old Norse religion today, but they clearly did not have a religion as we understand. Their beliefs were usually based on legends and stories which spread around their clans. The Abrahamic concepts of scriptures and religious law were strange for them. Their own concept of religion was mostly based on tradition and culture rather than a single understanding of truth and philosophy. Understanding the arbitrary nature of their beliefs and the harsh motives of their worldview is crucial to make sense of what they were doing, and we will discover this topic in detail with examples. But first, we need to see how these previously isolated people became an issue for the whole world. The Nordic people and the Danes mostly relied on agriculture and livestock to maintain their lives. There were some occurrences when several groups of warriors and adventurers left their lands to raid nearby settlements. Yet, the number of such events were usually insignificant. This remained so until the late 8th century. There are debates around the origins of the word Viking. One of the most common interpretations is that Viking means a Norse or a Dane who went on expeditions to raid, trade, and settle on new lands. The 8th century marked the beginning of the so-called Viking Age. In a very short time, forming expedition groups and going out to different lands to raid and trade became very popular among Scandinavian populations. The stories of various and large bands of raiders became the main source of concern around the world. It is unclear what drove the Norsemen and the Danes into such an action. Some say it was because of bad conditions. This actually makes sense. Scandinavian lands were not known for their vigorous crop yields. This may have driven adventurers to want to find new lands with better weather and soil. For one reason or another, large groups of Vikings set out to gain glory, plunder, and fame. In less than 2 centuries, they had settlements all around Europe, and they had already forced many kings and lords to pay them tribute. They were unexpectedly successful, at least in some ways. The question is, how did they manage? How did their mindset relate to their actions? What did they really want? What kept them motivated throughout their adventures? These are the questions for which we will find answers. First, we will inspect the socio-psychological structure of Vikings to understand how they were different. Then, we will move on to understanding what kind of disagreements caused divisions among them and how they differentiated among themselves. The old Nordic societies relied heavily on tradition to socially function. It was a traditional value for men to fight. Having a fighting spirit was so revered that it became the core of all moral values, especially for men. A man could do wrong things and still be considered honorable if he was a renowned fighter. Yet, a man who did not have the stomach to fight would be considered a shameful coward, despite having good qualities that would be highly valued in other societies. Having the will and desire to fight defined the concept of honor and glory for Vikings. Fighting for a good cause was also valued in European kingdoms at that time. Yet, fighting itself was never considered to be a source of honor and glory. For most of the other societies of the time, fighting was honorable only when it was justified by an acceptable reason. Most of the time, this reason would be to act in defense of the faith and the people. Vikings, on the other hand, believed that a man can have a good life after death only if he fights and dies well. According to the old Nordic beliefs of the Vikings, a man earned his good position in the afterworld through glory on the battlefield, not by having a calm and peaceful life. This belief was the exact opposite of the foundations of Abrahamic religions. Many Vikings were skilled fighters on the battlefield, and their understanding of honor and glory motivated them to fight and keep pushing forward, even in dire situations. Of course, this does not mean that they won every battle. There are many battles at which they were crushed. Yet, understanding their concept of warfare can help us understand how they stayed motivated to fight for years. Concerning this matter, it is also important to understand that there was a huge difference between how a follower of any Abrahamic religion and a Viking perceived the world. We are putting an emphasis on Abrahamic religions here, because it is known that Vikings also carried out raids against Muslims. The worldview of Abrahamic religions is actually optimistic. According to the religions of Holy Abrahamic scriptures, we live in a world created by an omnipotent deity. All suffering in this world will come to pass. If we protect our virtues amidst the moral challenges of this world, we will be rewarded with eternal life and everlasting relief by a God who is almighty. The God of Abrahamic religions is not compared to humans in any way and does not display the simplicity of basic human emotions and flaws. There is no reason not to trust the promise of eternal happiness in return for a virtuous life. The God who has made the promise is flawless, and his might is beyond human comprehension. The old Nordic gods, on the other hand, were believed to have flaws and weaknesses like humans. They could deceive each other and get hurt. They were not omnipotent in any sense. They had to make sacrifices to gain some of their powers. They had to fight like humans to reach their goals. This concept of ambitious, human-like gods, mixed with an emphasis on glory through fighting, made it very difficult for Vikings to have a positive worldview. They believed that their existence was based on constant fighting and making the most of physical pleasures while they could. This was the primary spiritual source of their motivation. It was almost completely based on a concept of triumph through endless struggle and fighting. They were, of course, motivated by the loot they could gain through their raids on various settlements and the plunders of the battlefield. What we have described so far fits the characteristics of a Viking warrior. Yet, there were many Vikings who were impressed by the peaceful lifestyle of the inhabitants of the lands which they invaded. All Vikings wanted land to settle and farm. The main division between them started when some of them wanted to use the riches and the stable supplies they gained through farming to wage more wars on their new neighbors, while others were happy with just settling down. This can be especially seen with the Vikings who came to England. After invading eastern lands of England and parts of Ireland, the Viking advance was stopped thanks to the efforts of King Alfred of Wessex. Instead of letting a seemingly endless series of wars continue, King Alfred offered Vikings peace and money. King Alfred was not easy to defeat. Some Vikings were happy with this offer. They already had lands in which they could live peacefully and enjoy the money they got from Alfred in return for peace. This phenomenon could also be observed in the case of Rollo of Normandy and his people. Rollo had originally arrived in France as a Viking. The king of Francia offered him lands up north and a life as a Christian lord if he agreed to protect his lands against other Viking invaders. Rollo accepted the king's offer. Rollo became the Duke of Normandy, giving away many aspects of Viking culture in return for a stable life with permanent benefits. Vikings were vicious fighters, and they were motivated by their traditional beliefs to constantly fight and struggle. This bolstered their bad reputation and turned them into a source of fear for most of the other societies in the world. Yet, the way in which they evaluated the situation and chose permanent benefits over temporary ambitions and desires show us that they were actually not so different from other humans. At least, not all of them.